That's how we own it.
What's up, family? It's your girl, Tamika D, Mallory.
And it's your boy, my son, the General.
And we are your host of Street Politicians, the place where the streets and politics meet. Well, today we are going to be talking about the State of the Union address. And, we have two guests that's coming on, so we don't get to do all of our usual chit-chatting, even though I was going to give you a little bit of my thoughts on some of the things you say on social media. But, I'll give you that next week. But for this week, because our guests are already here, I think we gotta bring them on.
You was gonna chastise me about social media.
I wasn't gonna chastise you. I was just gonna bring up something that I thought. But anyway, we're gonna have our guests to come on and let's talk about the State of the Union. We watched it yesterday, and I figured that it would be best to have some other folks come and give us a balanced approach to our opinions of what President Biden said. I thought, overall, there was some good things in the speech, but there's still a fundamental issue with policing. And, I'm pretty sure all of us agree on that. So let's bring the guests in and get this show started. So, friends, we all, how many of us have them? Friends, we have many. Our Street Politicians family. These two individuals, though, these are like friends.
These are brothers.
These are our brothers. We talk and debate and and deal with issues all the time. And I thought after watching, as I just said, after watching the State of the Union last evening, that, it helps to have other people so we can talk about different perspectives, and there's, I can't sit here and say that I thought the whole thing was just awful. No, I can't say that. I thought there was some really, really good points. But as we just said, there's some fundamental issues still that need to be addressed. And I'm not sure how we get there. So I figured these two know how we get there. So let's just introduce them real quick. And again, most people who know us, if you've been following us, you know them. But Reverend Stephan Green, he doesn't probably want to admit that he's one of my mentees, but kind of is. Kind of me and Linda. He's the pastor of St. Luke AME Church in Harlem, in Harlem, and also the founder of Faith for Black Lives, which is a major partner of Until Freedom. We do a lot of work together. So thank you for being on here, our good friend. It's a running joke that most of our guests are our friends. People might not like that, but we got a lot of friends doing a lot of incredible things. And our other friend and brother, who we just traveled with to Tyree Nichols' service, funeral service. I hate to even say that, and just have been, spending a lot of time with lately, is a former assembly member from New York State, Michael Blake. But he is so much more than that. He just got a letter from President Obama celebrating their win. The first caucus was in Iowa. Before that, people did not think a Black man named Obama could win and become president. And because Blake went to Iowa to live with folks, I always say he's a white people whisperer, because he went to Iowa to live among the white people. And somehow or another, Obama won that, President Obama won that caucus, which started him on the trajectory towards becoming the first Black president of the United States. And now Blake is CEO of Atlas Strategy Group, which has been strategizing my life. Lord help us all. So thank you for being on, Michael Blake and Reverend Stephan Green.
Hey, good to see you.
What up, though? What's good?
So my brothers, you know how much I love y'all, and I know y'all got definitely have some thoughts. I want y'all to both give me, what was your overall opinion of the State of the Union? Starting with you, Steve.
Sure. I like you all. I watched the State of the Union, and I was, every year I am just drawn into the pageantry of the American empire. It's sort of like routine of having the president once a year to deliver a State of the Union address to the Congress. And President Biden walked in, strong, like he had eaten his Wheaties, like Camp David was good to him this past weekend. And he delivered, I think, for about an hour and a half, a very powerful address, sort of acknowledging where this nation has come over this past year, recognizing that, how we have moving past the November election and really charting a pathway forward. I was excited to hear how he articulated a vision of ideas that we would have probably never heard talked about from the president of the United States of America as it relates to expanding education to pre-K to 2 years of community college and like having that funded, talking about insulin being at $35 of being capped at $35, talking about how we're going to rebuild this nation as it relates to infrastructure. So all these things, which are to his credit as a negotiator in chief, if you will, and someone who has served 30 years in the Senate, someone who's been in Washington for decades and eons, he knows how to maneuver Washington, even to the point where when he was being heckled and being chastised by the GOP for talking about not cutting Medicare or Social Security, he backed them into a corner and told them, so, okay, bet. Well, then you I know you all are not going to do that then. So, I thought he was masterful. He was skillful in his approach, his methodology, and starting with the economy and then moving to the social issues, if you will, was his strategy. But I think that's always been their strategy as it relates to like starting with the economy and working their way through society. But I would have started with social issues, because I think what's most important right now is the fact that this nation is so socially divided that we find ourselves in this sort of chasm. And so I would have started with Tyree Nichols. The fact that he made Tyree Nichols' mother and father sit through an hour and a half of him going back and forth with Republicans until he decided to talk about that every Black child should be able to return home like his children and the talk, I think it should have been at the forefront of his conversation, because that would have signaled to the nation how important it was. Although I'm grateful he brought it into the conversation. I'm glad it was there, but I was waiting until I was looking at the clock like, okay, so when is he going to talk about the reason why we're here? The reason why this nation is still grappling with this original sin of racism and how we move beyond that. So overall, I give him a great grade for effort. I give him and his administration a high regard for what they have done. The most significant legislation has been passed in Congress. He's done more in 2 years than some people have done in 2 terms. So I do want to give him credit for that, but also recognizing that there are some gaps and there are some holes that I hope that we will be able to begin to hold him accountable and hold others accountable as well.
Blake, what did you say?
First, I just want to show honor and give y'all the rose y'all deserve. So to Tamika and Mice for creating the space for us to have a space. So let's just start there. And obviously, anytime I'm around Reverend Green, your heart feels good because he's doing the work and showing that ministry goes beyond just what happens on a Sunday. I want to give quick context. Like I was a part of a team that had 2 State of the Unions when we were President Obama. And then, of course, we had the joint speech, because the first time a president does the address, it's not a State of the Union in that manner. And I've said this a lot over the last few months. I think it is hard to argue a president that has been more effective in their first 2 years than Joe Biden, arguably than any president in the history of this country. I think you could really make that argument. When you look at what he's done in the face of blatant racism, foolishness, obstructionism at every level. All the things that he said, he's like, I'm gonna knock this out, and he did. Then when you look at the speech, to your question, Mice, I can't remember a president ever talking about the talk in a State of the Union, right? Mm-hmm. And it would have been easy for us to have that under President Obama. But when you have, let's just call it as an older white man getting up there saying like, this is what's going down in these communities, it sends a message. And to say, not only do we got to go further in the George Floyd Policing Act, but how do you have, as Sheila Jackson Lee is now talking about, the amendment around how do you protect and provide the actual care that someone needs, but holding people accountable. But I think, look, and all of us do a lot of speeches here itself, the mastery of negotiating and calling out foolishness in real time can't be ignored. Mm-hmm. A sitting president fact-checked opposition about Social Security and Medicare in real time on the most important speech you give. In politics, this is effectively your Super Bowl, right? It's an hour where the country is watching you. Call them to the carpet, and now you got the video there. And I always think it's important for fact checks. when you have cats like Senator Mike Lee, who was like shaking his head and saying, no, this is ridiculous. You again, check the tapes. These are the same cats that were going back to 2010, literally saying we need to get rid of Social Security. We need to get rid of make all these things in this dynamic. So I think factually, it was an incredible speech. I think that there's always room for growth. You know, I think we got to start leaning in to how do you put more pressure on the cities and states to start implementing parts of the George Floyd Policing Act as we're waiting for Congress. I think we've got to lean in more around how do you go further in closing the racial wealth gap and being real practical about that. Now, yes, unemployment is at historic rates, but we still got Black folks that are hurting, right? And how do we lean in there? And I think the third piece is how do we start giving guidance and education about what's coming around education? And that was an area where I didn't think there was enough that occurred. June for the Supreme Court could be one of the darkest months in the history of this country, because I think a lot of people are anticipating affirmative action and student loans are going to go down. And I thought there was an opportunity for the president to really lean in about how he wants to see not just Congress, but his administration go all in. So I think tying it all together, Tamika and Mice, it was an incredible speech. But I think more important to me was the mastery of the moment, right? You know, Steve and I we preach a lot, right? And an exceptional preacher can read the room, and a sitting president who people will say is too old, not agile, can't flex, literally was able to fact check his opponents in real time.
Mm-hmm. So before I go, I just want to say one more thing. First of all, I will say that this was probably one of the strongest speeches that I've seen Biden. I've seen him in his presidency and just speaking. You know what I'm saying? But what I want to know is there are so many of our people who are jaded, right? They thought, it's another speech. Somebody cares about that. Damn, everybody talking. What do you think is going to take to reinvigorate just the common folks in our community, especially our young folks who just don't believe anything that comes out of anybody's mouth, especially because there's this real strategy to discredit the Democratic Party overall, you know, and a lot of people point at Joe Biden's past and they point at all these things. What do you think is going to take to reinvigorate our youth and our people to really have faith in this being more than just words?
Practical wins on the block that get messaged better.
Right. And I
think we just got to take that step back. I'll just say this piece and then go to Steve, right? Like the State of the Union, the framing and just even the name of it is him laying out how are we doing as a country, period. Like that's really the frame of it. But I think in terms of the success of this, we just got to get better of making it plain. Here are wins that happen to you and for you on the block, and being very direct around messaging around that. And we equally have to call out what this person is doing that is hurting you right now, not some theoretical taxes down the line, X percentages. This person is hurting you right now, period, point blank. This is why you got to vote them out, or this person is helping you right now. This is why we got to protect them. But obviously, Reverend Green has more.
No, I want to echo that same sentiment. I mean, it's taking what happens in Washington and putting it in Washington Heights, right? It's just like taking the message as it relates to the child tax credit and say, you remember when you had that $300 per child, right? And that is no longer. And when people felt that, you know, in their bank accounts, when they felt that impact of that policy in their own local experiences and their own personal experience, I think we see an effect in bringing the message. And I think that's what this administration has to focus on for the next 2 years, especially with a divided Congress, is getting out of Washington, like taking it to the streets, engaging in conversations. They should be holding community town halls and in states that they know that are in play in 2024 and talking about the Supreme Court. Not only will it be around affirmative action and around student loans, but also as it relates to the state legislators being able to decide around the electoral college or around, you know, as it relates to determining the votes for 2024 as a presidential election. So like the democracy piece, he mentioned a little bit about that as it relates to towards his end of his message as it relates to January 6th. He did not talk about how the fact that we have that Merrick Garland, who's sitting right in front of him, has failed to hold those who are responsible for organizing the attack on our democracy accountable. And I think that is where like there needs to be some emphasis. Like we're going to have to apply some people pressure to the places where that the president gave grace in ways that we as citizens of this country cannot afford to give grace because of the reality of what is still taking place, the current insurrection that is still taking place with Marjorie Taylor Greene, with the fact that George Santos of New York, it was in the middle of the aisle shaking hands with people and has ethics investigations occurring right now. Like, we got our democracy is at stake. But for Black folks, democracy has been a translucent word. We've been trying to figure out for 400 years what that word democracy really means, right? Like, what does it mean? I guess I'll say for the last 250 years, because American democracy started around 1776, one would allege, but one would even suggest it started in 1863, you know what I mean? Or 1865. So we still trying to figure out what in the hell democracy means,
Yeah. Some would suggest that we've never realized democracy, and that there's still a very, very long way to go. Let me be the one to push us here, right? And, and again, I want to be clear, because one of the challenges that some people have with me is that they want me to be just like super radical, just throw the baby out with the bathwater. It was terrible. He's horrible. And every Tyre Nichols just happened. And so therefore, damn everything they say. Right. And some days I wake up like that, and I have to call certain people like you, Blake, and others. Sometimes Stephan don't help me. We be together saying to hell with everything, but we've been able to, I've matured in my understanding of what, not even just politics, of what a president has to negotiate, right? It is a big job, right? And when you're in certain spaces and certain rooms, and this is the thing that I found out, not so much that I found out, but that I came to understand better recently, how we are always in danger, of losing local seats when there are different things happening federally that impact congressional members and others. So for instance, the president starts talking about George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and then you have local senator or local congressional member who lives in some town that starts having issues, because if you support that, then you're not with your police department, your fire department, your unions, your whatever, and it starts to create issues. So you're trying to constantly negotiate as the president all of these different things. Most people don't know, nor do they care. What they want to see is, how do you stop Tyre Nichols from being shot, or it's not shot, beat to death, right? And all the other cases. That's what they're interested in. They're not interested. It's like you and me telling our parents, and I know both of your mamas, so y'all know mine, trying to explain the reasons why you failed. It doesn't work, because I already know Mama Hillary, Michael Blake can't explain to her, well, then I was trying to sleep, and then, but then while I was sleeping, there was some loud music, and then this happened, and I tried to get the music off, and then I couldn't get back to sleep, and I drank the wrong tea, and this tea had the caffeine in it, so it kept me up later. Like, I get your story, I hear you, but the bottom line is, Tyre Nichols is still dead, and he is not alone. The camera footage is the only thing that allows us to see what happened to him and understand it clearly. But there's Ray and Pookie and TT and Keisha and others who are in hospital rooms right now that have been beaten the same way, and Vice President Harris will never be at their funeral, their bedside, or any of that. And people are trying to understand it. So I'm putting that out there, and then we're going to talk about this piece. What I appreciated was that he used the word accountability. You said that, I think, earlier, Michael. He used the word accountability. I think that is a point that has to be drilled down on every time we hear from the president on this issue, and even at times when they're just bringing it up. Accountability, because that's all we've been talking about. We haven't been talking about hating police. We haven't been talking about abolition, although some of us do believe that one day we could get to a space where we don't need policing as it currently stands, and we do need true public safety that includes the people, right? But we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about swift, strong accountability in these instances. So he did say that, but he said one thing that I am tired of hearing. And I think this, and this is what I want you guys to lean in on. This is in my judgment, it has almost become a trope for Black folks to hear you say, we need better training. Training to me sounds like what you're saying is, this is the route that we're going to use to give more money to police. This is my question. I want both of y'all to answer this. How can you fund the police? And I said all of that stuff. I went through negotiation and all of that, so people will know that we're not ignorant. We understand. But how do you fund the police? The CBC, most of them voted to get more funding to police just a few months ago. They do not have the proper accountability measures in the new bills. So money is going with sometimes the same policies in place, and then stand up and say, we've got to end the issue of policing, of corrupt policing and abusive policing and the violation of civil rights. How do people reconcile that? I'm gonna ask you, Blake, you go first. Tell me what are you telling Miss Laura, who's asking this question in Alabama somewhere, where her police chief is literally engaged in like sexual misconduct, and they know about it and nobody's doing anything.
So today, with it being the day after State of the Union, my afternoon was spent. I do a weekly conversation called Kairos Conversations, and the speaker was Pam Walker, the mother of Jalen Walker, who, as we know, in Akron, Ohio, more than 60 shots out, more than 40, but 46 who actually hit him, right? Itself, right? So in that manner, and I'm going to answer your question, but I want to give this quick context here, right? So you have that dynamic to the other families who were there yesterday, as she sat in the box, and the meetings that happened, not just with the Congressional Black Caucus, but also with the Department of Justice, because it's going also to your question. Tied to that is we also had Derek Albert, who chairs the National Organization of Black County Officials, in which an element they've been leaning in on has been, let's be clear, if it wasn't for that poll camera in Memphis, that accountability doesn't happen as quickly, because we know they would have lied to say, well, they reached for my gun in the tussle, right? But we then go a step deeper to a final piece around the element in the facade of training, to your point, because the Scorpion unit is just the next and latest iteration of what came out of Atlanta with the Red Dogs, which was another entity that, if you look at the story of Katherine Johnson, a 92-year-old woman that they busted in her door. Because of that, she shot back at them, and then they planted drugs in the house afterwards. Right? So to the question of what has to happen, there are several specific things. Number one, we have to attack the pensions, the insurance, and the financial protections of the officers and these units, because if someone knows that their money will be impacted, they're going to act a lot differently very quickly. Number two, the conversation around qualified immunity is not just a conversation around police officers, but the government employees. And too often folks are reluctant to really lean in on that. And I would just say to you, why should someone have the protection when they have done wrong? On the training, I could care less about the scenario that keeps being communicated, which I think is the miss scenario of let's just train other officers. No, what I want to know from training is what is being trained to the officers, written and oral, around how to cover up this nonsense. Because again, when you watch these videos, officers that are saying these comments that quickly of he reached, et cetera, that didn't just happen instinctively. Someone trained you to do that. And I do think we have to look at that element so that, to your question, Tamika, you can then go to the Department of Justice and say, number one, for civil rights infractions, if you want justice to occur, it is very hard to prove intent.
That's
so
right.
It should be lowered to recklessness and negligence. Number two, you should not continue to give funding to city and state entities and give them COPS grants if they have hired, suspended, or fired officers who had infractions of police brutality. That is something that is literally in control, that does not have to be changed by Congress. That can be something DOJ implements right now. And then equally and finally, as part of this, when we talk about the justice that has to happen every day on the block, It is the deeper recognition that we have to stop talking about reimagining policing, but reimagining public safety, right? Folks have to appreciate the context. I always think context is important. This all started as slave patrols. This is just a new name. And until people are willing to acknowledge that within communities, that police forces are having entities such as a Scorpion Unit or Red Dogs and getting billions of dollars that is then not coming back to our community. The final piece of this is a conversation that a lot of us are now having with mayors. The $2.1 billion that was just spent out in settlements, the amount of money that could be going to schools and housing and healthcare because you're not addressing on the front end is a way you could actually shift the conversation and say, you know what, hold these cats accountable, fire them, remove their financial benefits, and therefore you'll have cities and police departments and police chiefs actually move in this manner. Tying this together before Reverend Green is, I do think for Tyre Nichols' case specifically, while they moved swiftly, I am definitely still of the mindset and approach that there is a substantial cover-up that is happening from that police chief and why they moved that fast. Because there is no way someone can rationalize to me how 5 Black folk get fired that fast when you knew there was a 6th person who made the call saying he should be stomped out, when you knew there were others that were there in that manner, when you knew that the police statement that came out immediately actually had lies in it, and that you had a police officer go to Tyre Nichols' house and say to his mother, he is involved in an incident, you don't have to come, everything is fine. And so to me, the final element on this has to also be around the DAs. We have to have a mandatory element that if there is not an actual conviction that occurs in these cases, that the transcripts are released of the instructions. That is something we did in New York. Why? Because too often DAs are overcharging intentionally to try to avoid what's happening. And so all of these pieces are practical things that can happen on the ground, that we do not have to wait on Congress to move on, and that we can say that it's not just the president saying it, it has to be people on the block. Until that you have people that they only care about the survival of them winning an election rather than the survival of your life, that's when things will finally change.
Reverend Green.
Sure. I mean, I think that, just as a preamble, that I wonder sometimes if Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman would laugh at us in our attempts to try to provide accountability to a slave patrol system, like to find accountability for those who were enslaving Africans in this country would be laughable to our ancestral tradition of love warriors and truth tellers who believed in the vision of emancipation. And I think that's also a part of the work that we're having to do, is to provide the emancipatory vision. And it is because it's not going to be overnight. It's not an easy thing to just do because, America has had years and centuries of becoming who she is. But even the word of accountability being invoked in a State of the Union address, even the idea of a talk being discussed under the State of the Union address, is because we had the imagination in 2013 and 2012 to start the conversation around Black Lives Matter, police reform, police accountability, defunding the police, so that we even hear conversations around the president saying last night, what are some of the prevention measures that we can do, community violence prevention, so that before people even engage in police, before we even, and maybe there are other numbers or other people or other institutions or other avenues that people can call, like calling mental health therapists or social workers. All that's because we started the conversation and pushed this nation to imagine what life is like beyond policing. And I think that's also integral to what we are called to do, what we must do in order to truly enact the emancipatory vision and the abolitionist future that our ancestors led us to, and that we have inherited, particularly in this Black History Month, as we think about the legacy in which we walk in, but also as it relates to accountability. And former Assemblyman Blake, who was a former DNC vice chair, so he knows the policy is articulated so eloquently for us. It's so very true. Like the justice and policing, the policy legislation that can be enacted and things that can be done right now to hold people accountable, like even to the point of expanding consent decrees, right? And to ensure that more cities are held under accountability of their policing. We see that happen in Louisville, Kentucky, but not only does it need to happen, not only did it need to happen in Louisville, it needs to happen in Kansas City. It needs to happen in cities across this country where we go in, where the Department of Justice will go in and do a pattern and practice investigation to uncover some of these harms and to hold people accountable, and also to stop the transfer of these federal militarized equipment and this militarized weaponry that we use over and to expand our imperial nature that we then send to Main Street. When we were marching in Louisville, Kentucky, we're marching next to tanks, right? Like we were in the middle of a war zone in Afghanistan, all because when they finish using the equipment, or if they make too much of it, they send it to local police departments. All of these things create a culture in which we are living in that does not seem to honor and affirm the dignity of all human personality. And I think that is what is so problematic when it comes to policing. And I think that is what we are going to continue to have to press, is that as soon as you say we need accountability, in the same breath, you honoring Tyree Nichols is the same breath he's using to say we need more training, which, as you said, also means more money, more resources, continuing, because you can train whomever in the police department, but if you are stopping African-American history to be trained in schools, then you are creating a cycle where whatever you train, you're not going to close the gap in providing African-American history in your training. You're going to trigger, your training is about, how do I shoot to kill? How do I maybe shoot and ask questions after, or maybe shoot or tase? So we found out that the training mechanisms, the body cameras, the tasers, none of that proves to ensure that Black people live. All it does right now is to make sure that if you do die, we can hold somebody accountable, or at least have a march in regards to your death. That is not necessarily justice. That is not necessarily an abolitionist future. And that is not the vision in which we are hoping to build in this country of the world we want to live in.
Yeah, and I just sitting here thinking that we have to make sure we acknowledge our sister, Kristen Clark, who is the head of the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, because I know that, and I also have to acknowledge President Biden and Attorney General Garland for putting her in that position, understanding her history, where she comes from, and what she was going to the Department of Justice, to the Civil Rights Division to do. And it is to weed out bad actors, to really do serious and deep review of police departments across this country and other entities, because under the Department of Justice, we automatically, since this is our work and most people are directly impacted by policing. That's their first encounter, if you will, with something that they connect to government, right? Although it's all around us. It's in everything. It's in, banking and what's happening with, Black folks, or what do they say? Banking while Black. That's one of Attorney Crump's titles that he's been using for these lawsuits against banks. It's in situations happening with Johnson & Johnson and talcum powder, and how we, over many, many years, Black women were literally being poisoned by the powder. And now here we have a situation where so many women have died. And what does that look like in terms of accountability? So there's a lot of things, but policing is one thing that we immediately look at. And we know that Kristen Clark has been there trying to do a job that I'm sure is not easy. And yet under her, as you said, this department has done some incredible work. Ahmaud Arbery, we have to acknowledge it, right? We have to acknowledge that the McMichaels under this Department of Justice, and this is why I get so frustrated when people say to me, I can't believe you voted for Joe Biden. Well, if I'm looking at two choices in front of me, what I know is that during the time, and maybe you all will tell me if I'm wrong, under Donald Trump's presidency, was there one major case that there was a conviction like an Ahmaud Arbery situation? Does anybody know of one?
I couldn't immediately think of one. There might have been, but I can't immediately think of one.
I can't think of one. I'm not saying
the department. He cut the department.
He cut the department, and the department went in and shut down the dissent decrees and other things that was in place because of the 21st century. What was it called? The task force that President President Obama put in place. And in fact, instead of the attorney general at that time focusing on continuing the work, he created the Black identity extremist list of those of us. Probably all three of us are on that list because we too Black and we love Black people too much, right? So this is what they were doing. So what I'm bringing this up because they are doing Kansas City. Kansas is on the list. You said it needs to happen in Kansas City in terms of the dissent decrees. That is actually in progress. The Department of Justice is investigating what has happened there in Kansas City, Kansas, around sexual assault. I have to keep saying this, because this is the other piece. We're very concerned with the shoot 'em up, bang bang part of the ganging within police departments. But there are literally women and men. There was a story that came out a few months ago about officers pulling over Black men and assaulting them by touching on their body parts in ways that are questionable ways, right? This is a real thing that's also a problem that doesn't get addressed. And so the Department of Justice is looking at that. We have all of those things happening, and yet still, we are not at a place where any of us can get comfortable. Voting is a part of it. I think the economic strategy that Michael is talking about is something that we have not explored properly and thoroughly. We've been unable, because of labor unions, because some of our own people waver around. Anytime you start talking about taking people's money away, it becomes an issue. And qualified immunity is clearly a major non-starter, even for some of the Black leadership that we would expect to understand why it's necessary. So I'm, giving my rant today that leads nowhere but goes everywhere, to say that we're in a time, in a space where we've got to be super strategic, but we also have to understand that the next level is needed, right? Because all the things they're doing, accountability, Department of Justice, out here, indicting Breonna Taylor, the officers for killing Breonna Taylor, all of these things are happening, and yet Tyree Nichols is still dead. So there's a missing component. We have to go to the next level. And I agree with you 100%, Stephen. I don't know where in the speech the president should talk about accountability and policing and social issues. But I know that the prominence of this particular issue has to be at the forefront, right? And because if it is not, what continues to happen is that people do not think that we're taking Black death, murder, lynching seriously, to where we are willing to put political capital on the line and potentially lose if we have to, but lose fighting. As what do they say? I'd rather die on my feet than down on my knees, right? So I know you know the quote, because Stephen is the historian that knows every quote better than me, but I'd rather be standing up straight. And I hope that is what we see come out of this administration for the next 2 years, and the work that we have to do together. I want to say this last thing, and then I'm going to let you all close out and go. Hold on a second. What was it? It was that I was going to. I was going to say. So, and I have to say this because, I know people don't want to talk about a Black woman who they see, Chief Davis. She quickly, terminates these officers, and the DA quickly charges them. But you said something, Blake, that we got to lean in on, right? Something else is going on here. Chief Davis started the Scorpion Union. That's something that has to be put out there as truth. So we're holding two things at the same time. This woman she was not there when Katherine Johnson was killed for the Red Dog unit, but she therefore came in and she had oversight over this unit that, again, we know about Katherine Johnson, but imagine what that unit did and the type of destruction that was caused over the time that it was in place. She didn't dismantle it. She actually moved to a new police department in Memphis and started one called the Scorpion Unit. So this is not about Black and white, except when the victim is involved for the most part. It is not about us sitting there saying Black girl magic and, hey, This is about a system that has to be overhauled, that can't even at this point just be reformed. You guys give us your last point, Stephen, you can start. And then Michael, yes, I didn't have a question because I get real about this issue. Go ahead, Stephen.
I want to thank you again, Tamika and Mike, for giving us this opportunity and the work that you all do daily, right? To pour out yourself, right? To literally empty yourself. That is a part of kenosis. The emptying of ourselves for the work and for the common good is truly indicative of your love that you share for our people and the love that you are willing to sacrifice your own time and your commitments for it. So I want to appreciate you for that. And also to recognize that in this moment, the State of the Union is also like a call to action. It is indicative of the fact that the president is signaling to his base, signaling to those who are listening that I can't do this without you. Like, I don't have the votes in the Senate or the House to be able to do police reform or police accountability unless they end the filibuster, right? And the Democrats do it with 51 votes, or because or the lack thereof will have to be a bipartisan piece of legislation that we already know, right, where Senator Scott and Senator Lindsey Graham are starting at, and we already can only imagine what Marjorie Taylor Greene and Kevin McCarthy are starting with in the House. So we already realize that this may not be a dream we see realized in the next 2 years in this congressional session, but it's something that we can mobilize and organize and fight for, so that in 2024, as we go back to the ballot, we got to fight like hell between now and 2024 to get it done. But even if we die trying, we will renew ourselves to our commitment to see this through. Is that people forget that the Montgomery bus boycott lasted over 381 days. It was not an overnight success that Rosa Parks sat down and Martin King had a dream. It took a whole lot of work, a whole lot of tenacity and ferociousness and vitality of love warriors and truth tellers who were willing to do what it takes and even willing to die for liberation and freedom. So I want us to be reminded of that President Biden did his part, but now we have to take the torch and have our own State of the Union. What is the state of Black America? And not just state of Black America and how many Black billionaires we have or how many Black businesses we can start, but what is the state of the Black psyche? Our minds have been traumatized by this nation, by watching Tyre Nichols die to death. What does that mean for us? And so how do we begin to move beyond that horrific moment to begin to imagine again what society and what this democracy can look like? And so I thank you for giving us the space, and I look forward to building with you and working with you and doing all that we can together until freedom fighters to build the world and build this democracy that we hope to one day be able to live in.
Reverend Green made it clear throughout this conversation about how do we imagine a better space. And I think to your question, Tamika, that's what has to fuel us right now while we hold people accountable and demand changes in the immediate. The situation in Memphis is not Memphis isolated.
That's right.
Where you have leadership that are in positions who should not be in these roles, where there is no clarity why they're there, even in the midst of where they came from. And again, we just got to be real clear about it. She was fired from her previous post. And so like in a scenario of all that there. So when it comes to Tyre and Breonna and George and Eric and Jalen, et cetera, what we have to focus in on right now, in my opinion, is what is happening around the financial accountability on the local level, because this country continues to remind us that until you hold people accountable financially and until you build up people financially, we are playing behind the game, right? And so in that spirit, that's where I think our next 2 years and beyond has to be. There is a reason that reparations is tied to finances. It's not just about hugs and handshakes, right? It is about the shift in the dynamic of it all. When we talk about home ownership, 40 acres and a mule, what are we talking about? How do you have land and property in that manner? In that same manner, I think this is existing for police accountability. Bringing it back wholesale on where we're at. I still believe, as someone who has been preaching, has been in politics, who has been an entrepreneur, there is no greater way to have impact at scale, in my opinion, than through policy. I've still asked folks, tell me one thing in your life that's not impacted by policy. And I still have not had someone be able to give me an answer to that question. And so when we're talking about what has to happen, this is a scenario where I think we got to make it real plain and say to people 3 words: find your why. And the why is going to drive the policy and the efforts and the marching and the initiatives on where we're going, because the camera's going to leave.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the attention will leave, the press conferences will leave, but the policies can be institutionalized to stay. Mm-hmm. And that's why I believe that Until Freedom has to be at the cornerstone of all of this, because it is a reminder of the time that we have to pursue this. You cannot stop until.
Listen, I love both of you, our brothers, and as I said on Street Politicians, you two are our friends that come on the show and bring us so much insight and just, you know, being able to ground ourselves, right, as a community, our Street Politicians listeners, and all of us in the complexities of what we're facing. I know we all want a quick fix. It wouldn't have even been quick. We're talking about almost 500 years, you know, that we've been experiencing this extreme trauma. And we want a fix for it, but it didn't get here overnight. And it's not going to be shifted just because some of us are so smart and read some books or had some experiences, or, you know, you put 2 or 3 people in place. It's actually going to take some real hard work and some sacrifice that we've seen in the past to get to where we stand today. And I think that, for me, is the cherry on the top, is all that Michael said, all that Reverend Green has said, and then how do we get there and what are we willing to give up to make it happen? And that's the question that I think all of us have to ask ourselves, is how uncomfortable are we willing to be? Because everything you all have said in terms of reimagining, there are people who are reimagining and really daydreaming about a previous time that they would like to return this nation to. And in order for us to keep that from happening, our eyes have to stay really, really focused. Our pens have got to be writing. Our bank accounts has to show that we are sustaining our communities, supporting our own. Our churches need to be strong. We've got to educate ourselves, our kids, and other people's children and families who want to understand the history of this nation. There's a lot that has to be done on every level. And I tell everybody, and I'll end it here, not one of us and not one role can be diminished or dismissed. Every single person that's on this highway towards justice is needed. If you're in the economic space, you're needed. If you're a pastor, you're needed. If you're an educator, you're needed. If you're babysitting children, you're needed. If you make chicken at night for the protesters, you are needed. And more, for me, what will be my legacy, hopefully, is that I want the person who is dancing in a nightclub or the guy who's trying to get off a corner to know that they are needed as well. There is a role for every single one of us in this movement. God bless y'all, my brothers, and I'll see you all again, because we've got to keep talking about this a lot more as we continue during 2023.
God bless you. We love y'all. We appreciate y'all.
All right.
So today for my I Don't Get It, I know we've all seen the Grammys by now, and if you haven't,
because I have not.
Well, if you haven't, then you should probably look at it. I really, I don't like the way this whole Jay-Z and Beyonce's relationship is portrayed. It just bothers me. It just, these are 2 extremely successful, probably 2 of the most famous people in this world, successful people in this world, and they're a couple, and they're a married couple. And they love each other, and you know that. You can see that there's a respect, there's an admiration, there's a love, there's a union there. And the media somehow tries to portray it in a way that really bothers me. There was this whole scene where you see Jay-Z try to offer her something to drink, and she didn't want to drink. And they blew it out of proportion. Oh, she's mad, there's an attitude, there's something going on. And then, but right prior to her winning the award that made her the winningest, the person who had the most Grammy wins in history, she went to kiss Jay-Z, after she acknowledged. She took a deep breath. She looked at him. They looking at each other. She goes to kiss him, and the camera goes away from this. Now, it was very weird. I wouldn't have noticed it hadn't every other person who won and their significant other embraces. They show that. That's one of the major things that they show for every artist who wins the Grammy. They show the significant other hugging the family member, especially if they have a wife or a husband or whatever. They show that. And it showed Adele. Adele had won, and they showed that. And that's like a climax in winning the award. But it seemed very intentional that as Beyonce went to hug and kiss Jay-Z, that the camera just went off. And then it came back as soon as she finished doing it. And I really just don't get what is this infatuation with trying to, defame their relationship or try to show some level of,
discord
all the time.
It's intentional.
I just don't like it. I don't like it.
It's intentional. It's also the media and the way in which, it's like they can't find anything wrong with them, so they got to find something wrong with them. You know what I mean? It's like they're going to manufacture a problem or manufacture some type of emotions just because they don't know their business. And whatever little bit they do find out, it's usually somebody that's telling something they shouldn't be telling or an incident that's beyond their control. But for the most part, their environment is very controlled and they don't like it and it pisses them off. So therefore they do certain things that I didn't know. I didn't watch the Grammys. I wasn't able to, but what I can say is that I did notice from social media that when she went to kiss him, the camera went away. And I was mad because I was like, oh, I wanted to see, the love, and I wanted to see B kiss her husband and the whole thing. I didn't know anything about the other parts. I did not know anything about the, issue with earlier in the night when he tried to offer her a drink and she didn't want the drink. And I also didn't know about Adele. But while I was getting my hair braided by my homegirl, Delasia, she started talking about it, barbershop beauty parlor talk. And that's where you get most of your real understanding of what's going on and what Black people think. And she was like, yo, I don't understand why I had to see Adele and her husband in a beautiful moment, but couldn't see B and J in that. But yet I see all of this, back and forth about her not wanting to drink. She might have been mad. Who the fuck cares? People have the right to have issues and not be feeling each other. So I think it's intentional. Like sometimes it just is what it is. Sometimes at that moment it is what it is. Sometimes don't be trying to give me a drink now when I just had to cuss you out 5 minutes ago because you wasn't helping me put my shoe on. Now you want to try to give me a drink. Get out my face. But then after a minute, I have the right to come to my senses because this is bigger than me and you got into an argument in the car while we was in traffic and we was late and you was pissed because you been told me to start getting dressed. This is real. Like you been told me to put my clothes on. I'm messing around, not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. You get an attitude about it. Now we arrive, we huffing and puffing, we hustling, trying to get in here. Then, okay, now I'm getting ready to get my award and you my husband. What's the problem? I don't know.
Maybe there was nothing.
It could have been nothing.
You know what I'm saying? Like it's just too much. It's too much for me, and I applaud them because they very rarely even feed in to the negativity. You might hear Jay throw a line in a rap about it here and there, or B in a song saying something, but for the most part, you very rarely hear them talk about it. So continue to be great. B is the winningest person. Jay-Z got the highest nominations. I mean, they just great. That's a Grammy family. So I can keep hating while they keep winning.
That's it.
So that brings me to the end of another episode of Street Politicians. We appreciate y'all for always supporting us. Let us know what topics you want to hear about, who you want us to have as guests. We love y'all. Thank you for making us the #1 podcast. We're going to continue to make y'all happy. Shout out to Essential Hustler, my boy Harry. He finally gave me a hoodie. Lord have mercy.
You've been asking about that hoodie.
Oh, Lord have mercy. This is my friend from the BD since we was babies, and I'm the last one with the hoodie. But we ain't gonna put him on blast. But shout out to Essential Hustler and keep doing your thing. We love y'all. I'm not gonna always be right. TDM is not gonna always be wrong, but we gonna both always, and I mean always, be authentic.
Peace.
Salute.
Listen to Street Politicians on the Black Effect Network on iHeartRadio.
And catch us every single Wednesday for the video version of Street Politicians on iWomen.tv.